Good evening, folks. Ken Hovind here in the crew at Dinosaur Adventureland in Lenox, Alabama. Slightly hot, Lenox, Alabama. Today, got a bunch of tours. I'd love to give them those tours around the camp. Dinosaur Adventureland. It's the 4th of July, 2024. This is our boot camp. We started these in 2006. We've had some great speakers today, the 4th of July, to commemorate. A bunch of brave guys said, look, we hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal. They're endowed by their Creator with certain rights. Where do rights come from? From God or from the government? This is the fundamental issue between the liberals and the conservatives right here. A bunch of brave people died for fighting for our freedom. And thank you for your veterans. Anytime I see a veteran at the restaurant or something with his veteran's hat on, I walk up and I tell him, thank you for your sacrifice, and I apologize for our stupid politicians. They send you guys off places you shouldn't go. How many vets we got here today? Anybody in the military? Any branch in the military? Okay, several. Good. Proud of you. Thank you. My dad was a Marine, World War II, only survivor of his platoon. Okay, freedom is not free. It costs a bunch of money, costs lives, costs legs cut off, arms cut off. You take the number that are killed and take it times 3 or 4 to get the number that are wounded and have a lifetime injury. Many people have died. Just the Civil War, 620,000 Americans died. World War II, 405,000 Americans died. What a mess. Freedom isn't free. Thank you for your sacrifice for our country. The Bible says he caused everybody, small and great, rich and bond, to receive a mark in the right hand or in the left hand, in the forehead. It's coming, folks. We're coming to the close of the age. I think it'd be wise for all of you to get stuff that you want to keep on DVD, not on the internet someplace. They're going to be able to shut the whole thing down. Those sermons we heard today, you ought to get those and copy them onto DVD. You're welcome to get that's why we put a lot of stuff. People say, oh, DVD is obsolete. Right. That's what they're hoping you'll say. Get it all on the cloud, and then you can't get on the cloud anymore because you got to have the mark of the beast to get on the cloud. Get everything you can on DVD and get a DVD player. They're $29 at Walmart, and be ready to just watch stuff without having to go on the internet. Okay? The old-fashioned way. Okay. Praise I Am is going to be tonight at 7 o'clock about slavery and the Bible. What's the Bible say about slavery? And then 8 o'clock, Donnie and Matt. And then after that, tonight, fireworks on the sand dune. Yeah. I like those veterans' hats. I guess this guy said, my oath of enlistment has no expiration date. Yeah, you took a vow to defend the country. Keep defending it, even after you get out. So tomorrow, Brother Meister at 8 o'clock in the morning, Sutter Green, and the Green family bought me a Hawaiian shirt with American flags all over it. Look at that. A patriotic Hawaiian shirt. Yay. Perfect. Thank you for the 4th of July gift there. And then 1 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, Patrick Urish. And then Carmen at 2 o'clock. And after Sunday, tomorrow afternoon, we'll be doing all kinds of playground stuff and setting records and swimming at the lake. Then tomorrow night, Sam Shumo talking about the Trinity, explaining what is very difficult doctrine to explain. Jason debunking the flat earth finally. That's going to be fun, brother. And then Saturday, Bob Holmes. He's going to be here, right? We got to play him in volleyball? He's the one-man volleyball team. He wins like 95% of his games. Yeah. Do you know where we have one? See if you can find. If not, we'll go buy one, okay? And Brother Meister again at 9 o'clock. And then 1 o'clock, Jason again. And Donnie and Matt at 2 o'clock. Is that the schedule? And then Saturday night, Diane Biddle, Evidence for the Flood. And Pastor McMurtry, what about eternal security? Yep. I tell people, if you could lose your salvation, everybody would lose it every day. You cannot possibly lose your salvation. Here we are, Creation Boot Camp. All right, let's see, brother. Got him on the ready to go back there. Praise I Am. Take it away. Tell us all about yourself and your ministry. Go for it. Can't hear you. Louder. Who's muted? It is not working. Push a button. Do something. Is it on our end? It's on your end. Call him, brother. Talk him through it. Would you on the phone? We had him just 4 minutes ago. We can't hear you, brother. Do something. Push a button, unmute yourself, do whatever you got to do. We are not hearing a single thing.
Testing 1, 2,
We heard.
3.
There you go. Okay. Keep talking. Hello?
Yeah, we were having some audio
All right.
issues. We
Whatever you
apologize.
did. Okay, go for it. Take it away, brother.
Yeah, I'm from Oklahoma. I host my channel consists of apologetics. We defend creation. We defend different topics that critics like to come against Christianity against, and one of them is slavery. And they like to accuse and impugn our creator, our God, as being malignant and being nefarious and basically, being immoral, like a moral monster. And that's the way they portray him. And I'm excited tonight to be here to hopefully present the opposite case and maybe hopefully inform people and maybe even educate, edify people to defend the Old Testament better, because there's a lot of knowledge out there that we have to come to understand about the Old Testament. We have to go to their culture, so we can't impose our culture upon that ancient culture back then. That is a huge error, and it's called presentism, ethnocentrism. In my book, I put a whole book out, and it's on Amazon. Biblical Slavery Exhaustively Debunked. I go into this, how people inject their modern interpretation or modern understanding of Scripture into an ancient text in their culture. It's very bigoted and anti-Semitic, even to the point of even anti-Semitic, I would say. But so, Ken, you want me to just go with the presentation now, or just because that was my opening? So I don't.
Yes, sir. You
I
are
guess
on
we'll
the.
just
You're
continue
on,
with the
brother. Go ahead.
presentation.
You are ready.
Great. So I'm going to try to share my screen here. Let's see. Presentations. There we go. Trying to figure out how to share my screen. Here we go. So give me a second here. I pull it up. So basically, I want to first get into the crux of the matter tonight, and I want to explain how the Pentateuch is assembled. So firstly, the Pentateuch is assembled in two categories of law. The first category is called casuistic law, and the second is called apodictic law. We're going to go through the first, and we'll get to the second. So firstly, casuistic law, case law, comprises 98% of the Mosaic law. These laws are not normative, prescriptive, they're not regulatory, they're not legislative, and they're not connected to God directly. But rather, these were extrapolations of scribal exercises by Israelites from the Decalogue, also known as the Ten Commandments. So this is an overwhelming consensus among ancient Near East scholars, A&E scholars. This is important because even if the Torah explicitly endorsed slavery, it could not be connected to Yahweh. In other words, it is patently impossible to charge Yahweh with endorsing slavery because the syntactical framework of the Torah does not permit the possibility. So the other 2% of the laws, known as the Decalogue, the Ten Commandments, are normative. They're prescriptive, they're regulative, and they are legislative. They are binding for us forever. They're eternal laws. These are absolute laws. And these were directly handed down by Moses. Why is this the case? So, this is a segue into the next aspect of law known as paradigmatic law, which I feel is the essence of not only the whole law, but the entire scriptures itself. I will show scholarship that demonstrates biblical law was not meant to be exhaustive, but rather limited. This is because God wanted to convey that all the laws are meant to reflect two major underlying principles. And that is to love God with your whole heart and love your neighbor with your whole heart and love them as yourself. So the whole law is encapsulated in those two underlying principles. This is called paradigmatic law. So so we're going to go through a little bit of scholarship here. Let me take this out because I think I have the wrong one there. Sorry about that. Here we go. So I think it'll be, as we go on with this presentation, I think it'll begin to materialize why is the law put into casuistic law and apodictic law, two categories, because the law is not meant to justify people. It's not meant in a soteriological sense. It doesn't save people. These are general principles that God put through the 10 commandments for people to understand that every aspect of the law, every single aspect comprehensively is extrapolated within two principles: loving your neighbor and loving your God. So if you're going to enslave your neighbor, rape your neighbor, murder your neighbor, you're violating those two major principles. This is how the Torah is constructed. And we'll get into that. I'm going to get some scholarship going here. This, and I think people misunderstand the Bible, the biblical law, because they take it as an exhaustive set of rules or like guidelines, like a set of a set of like a book. It's like a something like a letter, like a letter of laws. Like they're just going to have to the letter of the law. And that's just a misunderstanding of the law. So apodictic law versus casuistic laws in the Pentateuch, normative and descriptive. So 98% of these laws are descriptive laws. And I'm going to quote here Conrad Schmidt, and he says some comments on the legal status of these codices may prove helpful at this point. Although there has been extended discussion on the function of the ancient Near Eastern law collections, there is a growing consensus that these collections had primarily a descriptive rather than a normative status. They do not contain rules for everyday life. Instead, they seem to be products of learned scribal traditions that dealt primarily with complicated and extraordinary cases. Everyday conflicts were usually solved according to the customary legal traditions, which they did not need to be fixed in writing, but were part of a legal common sense. So these are common sense laws. That's called paradigmatic law. It's common sense because God wrote in our heart that conscience is moral law in our heart. We're not, murdering your neighbor, violence, enslavement, rape. All this stuff is common sense laws. God didn't need to write a set of rules for us, an exhaustive set of rules like today's law. And rather, these are more apodictic. They're more in an make it simple, it's like the Torah is constructed like in an evangelical sense. It's for people to have good lives. It's meant in a sociological sense that to govern your to have a healthy society, to operate correctly in a society, how to have a healthy family, a family life, and have a good life. Because if you're murdering people and raping them and stealing and lying, it's going to be it's going to be a disastrous society. So these are what we call meta-ethical laws. They're not meant in a soteriological sense to be saved. These are not meant to justify people. They're more in a sociological sense. And I want people, and this might be hard to grasp because people take the law, the biblical law, as an exhaustive set of rules. Remember, what's important about the law is the spirit of the law, not the letter of the law. But I mean, this is a consensus viewpoint. The biblical law, by no means is exhaustive. It's very limited. In fact, sometimes they even copy some of the same laws. You just wouldn't have that if this was exhaustive laws. So, what are we supposed to get out of this, though? So, the apodictic part of the law and the casuistic law, they represent a bigger set of underlying principles that encompass all the laws. Jesus said this. Also, Yahweh said this. Yahweh, the great I am, Elohim, however you want to, characterize the Lord. Just call him the Lord. The Lord also did this too. He says, "Love thy neighbor with all your heart," but also love God with all your heart as well. So this isn't nothing new. So it is the spirit of the law, not the letter of the law. The Torah was not an exhaustive set of wooden rules handed down by Yahweh, but rather paradigmatic principles centered around loving God and neighbor. It has been argued, here's a quote, this is from E.W. Davies. It has been argued, for example, that many of the injunctions contained in the Pentateuch were not hard and fast statutes intended to be applied to the letter in the formal courts. Rather, they were viewed as general instructions concerning the type of acceptable behavior expected of the people of Israel. In a detailed discussion, law books contained in the Hebrew Bible, Dale Patrick has argued that they were intended not for judicial application, but for instruction in the values, principle, concepts, procedures of unwritten divine law. So the apodictic, remember, apodictic laws are unconditional laws. These are not descriptive. These were handed down by Yahweh. The 10 Commandments were handed down by Yahweh to Moses. But the other 600 laws were not. These are conditional laws. These are hypothetical laws. These are descriptive laws. So the Israelites, what they did is they extrapolated 600 case laws. That's what the other part of the law is case law. Whatever type of possibility or happenstance or hypothetical scenario might happen, they're adding it in there. And it's supposed to reflect, again, God's two major underlying principles: loving God and loving your neighbor. Jesus also reflected this in the New Testament, the gospel. Those are the whole law, and the prophets hang on two laws. This is what the Torah, this is the essence of the Torah. We don't want to look at these as rigid laws, like a set of rules, like we're just almost like pets, like we're just controlled pets or something. But rather, no, they reflect love. The Torah reflects the principle of love. That's the whole principle of the Bible. And we have ancient Near East scholars who are not even believers. That's a consensus viewpoint. That is syntactically the case. You couldn't even if you wanted to argue, someone to say, "Oh, no, these are rigid rules, and these are legislative, prescriptive, normative laws." Well, you have to demonstrate that syntactically. So the only laws that we know that are absolute laws are the 10 Commandments. These other laws, the people extrapolated from the 10 Commandments. But you can see here, like, here's some more of the quote here. The throughout much of the Pentateuch are more like moral precepts than legal prescriptions. So you see how these are more moral, ethic, sociological. These are not soteriological. They're not meant in a legalistic sense. No one has ever been saved by the law. No one ever will be. So the whole Bible reflects this idea that the Ten Commandments reflect God's moral nature. In other words, they're a tutor for why we need salvation, because when we look at these laws, we see how holy and perfect and righteous and just God is. So they're a schoolmaster for us to come to him in repentance, and that's always what they were used for. They never, this might shock people, because we've had people on SFT's channel argue dispensationalism, where people were justified by the law. That's never been the case. And even the syntactical structure of the Pentateuch demonstrates that. That is a consensus viewpoint. So there, these laws outside the Ten Commandments, stemming through from Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, were not normative prescriptive. They were rather descriptive, conditional laws. So this is an important thing to set forth, because as long as we get that out of the way, people understand the construction, or the Torah, the Pentateuch was assembled, then we can go into paradigmatic law and understand the whole point of it, and what was the purpose of the law. So we're going to talk about the paradigmatic approach. So a paradigm. So paradigmatic means paradigm. It's something that is overarching, something that encapsulates all things, and it's not specific, but rather it's inclusive. So this paradigmatic approach addresses the intended purpose of the law, operating beyond the dissection of individual laws. Instead, it serves as an overarching guiding principle for all the ethical scenarios in life. As emphasized by several scholars, loving God and your neighbor as yourself encapsulates the essence of the entire law. Consequently, any form of slavery, rape, or criminal act is forbidden, because it contradicts the fundamental principle of loving God and your neighbor. So God's two greatest commandments is to love him, then love others. We also read that all the commandments hang upon these two. After all, the first four commandments of the first four commandments of the 10 commandments deal with how to love God, and the next six on how to love mankind. So the 613 laws of Moses then elaborates how to execute the 10 commandments, so that we uphold the two greatest commandments. The law of Jesus encapsulates spiritually all that has been said by God from the beginning of time. And this is R. Engelbrecht. He's an ancient Near East scholar, PhD. So this isn't like Joe Bob from Mississippi, just saying what he thinks it means. These are experts in the languages, the culture back then. And that's very important when we're trying to understand Old Testament law. Here's a quote by S.C. Mott. He says, the Torah, like other ancient Near Eastern laws, is paradigmatic rather than comprehensive. These laws are not exhaustive for a reason. God didn't need to explain not to rape your neighbor, not to enslave your neighbor, because that was already understood with the Imago Dei, the image of God, image bearers, which is to love God and love your neighbor. So Christopher Wright is a notable source in the ancient Near East, but he says, for Wright, the ethical demands of the Old Testament are grounded less in laws and rules than in the character of God himself. So we don't need to look at rules for humans. We need to look at the opposite. We need to look at the character of God himself. These rules reflect God, especially the 10 Commandments, especially his love and justice. In his view, therefore, reaching conclusions about the applicability of a particular passage involves the process of obtaining principles from the 10 Commandments and the moral laws of the Old Testament. This becomes the basis for applying the cases and illustrations found in civil laws, as well as the rest of the Torah and biblical narratives as well. So how then do we use the law of God correctly? Christians know that Christ's death and resurrection fulfills the ceremonial law. We also know that the moral law of God is absolute and solidly based on the unchanging character of God, and therefore is to be taken at face value. But what about civil law of God? For interpreting and using the civil law of God, we must ask what lies behind that. So, in other words, we let's see here. That's my position. So, do not muzzle an ox while it's treading upon the grain. If this were meant to be taken literally, who did who did not own a farm with oxen could feel excused from observing this law of God. So, Old Testament scholar Christopher Wright again makes an important contribution to ethical reflection of the law. So there's a paradigmatic application of the Old Testament laws for social ethics today that remains faithful as a model or paradigm of holistic concern for human need, theologically relevant to evangelistic endeavor as well as socioeconomic reform. Even the specific order of the Ten Commandments reflects a scale of values. The arrangement of the commandments gives some insight into Israel's hierarchy of values. Roughly speaking, the order is God, family, life, sex, and property. So it is sobering looking at the order that as modern society is debased in the Western form at least. We have almost exactly reversed that order of values. So we're actually going in the exact opposite direction of what biblical law is supposed to be understood as. It's moving the opposite way. So Douglas Stewart's another PhD Hebrew scholar. He's one of the top ones out there. I think one of the most decorated scholars. But he says a final implication of paradigmatic law: not all laws will be equally comprehensive in scope. That is, some will be very broad in their applicability. Love Yahweh your God. And some much narrow, do not bear false witness. One might ask, why not say don't be dishonest in any way, which would be the broader, more comprehensive than don't bear false witness? But that would be missing the way paradigmatic law works. Through a somewhat randomly presented admixture of rather specific examples of more general behaviors and very general regulations of broad categories of behavior, the reader listener comes to understand that all sorts of situations not exactly specified, either because the law is so broad or narrow, are also implicitly covered. In other words, when all the laws are considered together, one's impression is that both the very narrow and the very precise issues and the very broad general issues fall under the purview of God's covenant. So the wide variability of the comprehensiveness is intended to help the person desiring to keep the covenant to say, I now see that in the tiniest detail, as well as the widest, most generals say I'm expected to try to keep this law. In all its implications, not just in terms of its exact wording, some commandments are thus less broad in scope in the way they are expressed and is necessary to cover all the intended actions. Never think up all the ways they might be applied. This is just as it should be. The narrow and the broad taken together suggest the overall comprehensiveness of the covenant will for his people. And continuing on that, M.L. Strauss says a paradigmatic approach, drawing especially on the work of Christopher Wright, Vogt, and others have suggested, instead of a paradigmatic approach to the law, a paradigm is a model or pattern that enables you to explain or critique many different and varying situations by means of some single concept of set governing principles. In grammar, a verb paradigm uses a model verb to show the pattern by which you can parse many other verbs. So there it is. That's the law in a nutshell. But I'm going to go into specific texts that opposers of Christianity, adversaries of Christianity, or skeptics of Christianity like to bring up. I'm going to cover the big ones. So obviously, Exodus 21 is a big one, but in fact, I'm going to go to my other one for that. But you know what? I'm going to start with the biggest one just so we get the biggest one out of the way and make sure we have time here. So we're going to talk about the striking of a slave. Now remember, the word slave in the Hebrew is aved. It's really servant. The KJV gets it perfectly right, servant. But some people use slave as a debt slave. But see, here's the issue. People inject their modern understanding of the word slave as in the antebellum sense, as an African slave or something along those lines, or terrible slavery, or it really was slavery, and they equivocate it with biblical slavery. So we got to be careful when we use the word slave. You have to elucidate, what does that mean? It just means someone that serves. That's all it means. It comes from the word avad in the Hebrew, and it's used over 5,000 times in the Pentateuch, or actually no, the Tanakh. It's used so many numerous times, countless times, in only a very small sliver did it mean with oppressive slavery or someone being forced to do slavery, and that was with the Egyptians. That was it. Every other time means to be voluntary servitude, and that's what the word means. It's just serving. So in Exodus 21:20 through 27, it's, the atheists love to parrot, well, you can beat your slave as long as they don't die. You can beat them to an inch of their life as long as they don't die. You can treat them like furniture. We call chattel slavery. You can treat them like objects, less than human. So is that true? No, that's not true. This is in Exodus 21:20 through 21. So we're going to start in Exodus 20:20. And let's see here. I could pull it up on the screen. Let me read it really quick just so we can get some context. That would be, sorry about that, it's a little laggy. Make sure you get the KJV, because that is the best translation, the most accurate out there for sure. So, and if a man smite his servant or his maid with a rod, and he die under his hand, he shall surely be punished. And I like how the KJV translators use the word punish here, because it denotes, especially in the Hebrew, it's called an infinitive absolute. Punish, punish, they shall surely die. That's what it means. So it's a death penalty. So if a master smites his servant with a rod and he dies, the servant or the aved, he shall surely die. So that shows us that it's an important thing to understand about this text, is that the slave here, I'm going to call him the slave in the biblical sense, a debt slave. The debt slave has equal value to everyone else, because any type of murder of any Israelite, it was automatic death penalty. We see the same here. There's the slave, if they are killed unjustly or murdered unjustly, the master is to be put to death. And this is indisputable in scholarship. It's not even disputed. So it shows that there's equal value of slaves and also non-slaves in in the ancient Near East, or local, in the Mosaic covenant, and all the way out through all the way through the New Testament, obviously, as well. So the problem is, and this is where the skeptics of the Bible, they mischaracterize, misconstrue. Maybe I can share the screen because I'm going to show the verse. Let's see here. Here we go. So the problem comes in verse 21. According to the skeptics, there is no problem. Notwithstanding, if he continue a day or two, he shall not be punished, for he is his money. So, oh look, you can beat your slave. You can treat them like chattel. You can treat them like chattel as long as they don't die. But is that really what's being said here? No. So this 1 or 2 days is a rhetorical statement. I'm going to pull that up here. Jonathan Burnside does a great job explaining the rhetorical device of 1 or 2 days. So the 1 or 2 days actually reflects 1 or 2 witnesses or even more witnesses. So it's about witnesses. It's about proper deliberation in that ancient context, in that ancient milieu. So here's Jonathan Bernstein. He says biblical justice was supposed to operate against a background of regard for due process, ensuring that sentencers were of sound moral character was one aspect of this noted above. Rules of evidence were another. According to Numbers 35:30, a single witness was inadequate. Deuteronomy 17:6, Deuteronomy 19:15 states that someone should only be put to death on the testimony of 2 or more. Do we see that formula here in Exodus 21? You betcha. Literally 3 witnesses. So the formula is an intensifying rhetorical device that emphasizes the need for as many witnesses as possible. The greater the number, the safer the conviction. CF, the similar formula, a day or two means a witness or 2 or 3 or more witnesses. Get as many witnesses as you can before you convict somebody. That's what it's gleaming on. That's what it's referring to. So the Deuteronomy 17:4 means that the 2 or 3 witnesses formula could never be reduced to a numbers game, especially if the witnesses themselves were of doubtful character. We should not therefore regard 1 Kings 21, 1 through 15, the Naboth incident, as demonstrating the weakness of biblical rules of evidence. Accepting the testimony of 2 scoundrels, verses 10 through 13, was itself an outrage and the odds with the purpose of Deuteronomy 19:15. The author makes it clear that not only Jezebel and the false witnesses were guilty of the death of Naboth, but also the elders and nobles for accepting such testimony. And this is Jonathan Burnside, God Justice Society, another PhD scholar. So the 2 or 3 days was not because they beat him so bad that they had to, they had to rest 2 or 3 days. Now think about this. People play basketball games. Black court basketball games, they sprain their ankle and they're out for weeks. So if you beat the living hell of your slave, it's going to be more than 2 or 3 days, folks. So this is not talking about beating your slave as much as you can, as long as they don't die. This is about getting witnesses. It's a rhetorical device. So there's that part. So that destroys the the accusation or the charge of slavery by skeptics that Exodus 21, 20 through 21 prescribes or endorse slavery. They don't. And they couldn't even, you couldn't even they couldn't even try to even get that uh, validated, because the Torah itself is not even prescriptive. Only the Ten Commandments are. So, what about the? I do want to add the last part too, that these skeptics, they purposely gloss over the next passages in Exodus 21. You want to see how disingenuous and disrespectful they are to Scripture? Well, I'm gonna pull it up. You guys will see, hopefully. Let's see here. I'm just going to pull up my own app so it doesn't have to go through the internet, because it's so slow right now, the internet. Apologize for that. So we'll get into Leviticus 25, the other huge. So there's two major arguments from skeptics that they try to use to try to charge the Bible of slavery. Exodus 21:20 through 20, or yeah, 20 through 27, and also Leviticus 25:44 through 46. So we'll tackle Exodus 21 right now, and then we'll get to Leviticus 25. And here we go. Put that on the screen. Let's see, there's two screens there. There we go. So hopefully that cleared some issues up for people that are confused about Exodus 21. We'll go right there right now. I'm going to show the other safeguards that would, even without that understanding of the rhetorical device that is talking about two or three witnesses, let's talk about the other passages right below it. Look what it says: eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, hand for a hand, foot for a foot. That means if a master poked the eye out of his servant, they could poke their eye out of their own master. It's called the law of lex talionis. If you poke someone's eye, you can poke them back. If they punch you in the face, you could punch them back. So even the slave could defend themselves. It says it right here: eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burning for burning, wound for wound, stripe for stripe. Stripe for stripe, that's talking about slavery. If a master tries to whip you, whip him back. The law permits it. But even here, it even goes beyond that. Not only lex talionis, it even goes into that they're going to be, so their contractual obligation, their contractual obligation would end. That means that no longer would they be serving. They would be, they're out of their, so there would be no longer any debt to pay off to their master. So what would be the reason why someone would become into slavery in the first place in the Old Testament? Well, debt slavery. Well, it's because they had debts to pay off. They work these debts off through labor. It's called indentured servitude. It's nothing new. This has been going on for centuries. I mean, since the beginning of time, this has been going on. People working off debts. So what happens is, if the master unjustly smacked his servant in his tooth, his eye, any type of damage at all, they would be released out of their contractual obligation. So some people say, "Oh, it just says their tooth," or below it just says his eye or tooth. Well, as Christopher Wright explains, this is explaining every single instance. Doesn't matter if it's an eye, a tooth, anything, any type of unjust punishment or harm to the servant, they would be released out of their contractual obligation. These are safeguards for the slave. Why did those critics of the Bible that accuse Yahweh of slavery, why did they skip over 26 and 27 right just below it, just a few passages below it? because they have to push the narrative, for their evil, to excuse their evil so they're not held accountable to Yahweh on Judgment Day. That's how they try to get out of it. Oh, Yahweh's evil. He was immoral. He's a bloodthirsty, etc., etc. He endorsed slavery. He's a misogynist and all these other things. But see, they have to push that narrative for their conscience sake because they reject and deny God. So don't let them do it. Call them out. Let them know you're purposely glossing over 26 and 27. That they not only, but also 23 through 25 as well. Strive for a stripe, life for a life, tooth for a tooth. They could fight back and defend themselves. Slavery debunked right there. That's one of the major ones they use. Let's go to the next one now. Is Leviticus 25. This is probably the biggest one of all. This is a this is pretty cool. It's beautiful. If you actually look at the right lens, it's beautiful. Leviticus 25. So let me read it. I'm going to give the argument, that I'm going to debunk the argument, dismantle the argument, and explain it, what's going on here. And it's beautiful. It has a beautiful principle behind it. Both thy bondmen and bondmaids, which thou shalt have, shall be of the heathen that are round about you, or the goyim, the nations. Of them ye shall buy bondmen and bondmaids. Moreover, the children of the strangers that do sojourn among you, of them ye shall buy, and their families that are with you, which they begat in your land, and they shall be your possession. So, they look at the word possession here. Oh, that's chattel slavery. That they're literally, put on the level of furniture, like they're treated like animals or something, farm animals. But here's verse 46, and they go, well, here's another evidence of biblical slavery. And ye shall take them as inheritance for your children after you, to inherit them for a possession. They shall be your bondmen forever. But over the brethren of the children of Israel, you shall not rule one over another with rigor. So, look, it says to not rule with your fellow Israelite. Do not rule with them with rigor. But you can do that with what they call a foreigner. What the heck is a foreigner in the Bible? Well, we're going to go through that. Well, first of all, let's talk about verse 44 so we can try to address this as quick as possible. So you have the word here, buy. So both thy bondmen and bondmaids this shall have, that shall be the heathen around you, you shall buy. There it is, the word buy. So they think this is basically slave trafficking. There's plenty of slave trafficking today, pretty bad stuff. But the word buy here is kana in the Hebrew. All you have to do is have research Bible study, because does anyone remember when Boaz bought Kanad Ruth? Ruth was a Moabite. She's a foreigner. Would anyone say that, Boaz enslaved her wife? No scholar would say such a thing. It was a love. It was true love. It's one of the best love stories in the Bible. So Boaz bought a foreigner named Ruth. But also, here's another aspect of this as well, Abraham. So Abraham also had foreign servants or slaves. You want to call them slaves, because I think this is a quicker way to explain it, debt slaves. But what does it say about, does anyone remember having to Eleazar that he would bequeath his house and goods to Eleazar, his foreigners. His foreign slave. So that is called something in the ancient Near East. So this was nothing. This wasn't something that was isolated and unique. No, this was spread all around the ancient Near East. It's called something, the process of called manumission, adoption through manumission. They could be adopted. This is what's going on here. I'm going to show in my book, I'll show a citation for this as well, that the Israelites would literally redeem. So they're redeeming people out of slavery. Boaz redeemed Ruth out of slavery. Abraham redeemed his Eleazar out of slavery. So the word here, buy, means to redeem. These foreign slaves they would be adopted. They would go through a legal process where they would get their ear pierced as a token, a commitment to their master, because they loved their master. Eleazar loved Abraham. He had his ear pierced. He attached to Abraham's household for life. That's what's going on here. No one puts in their research or study to find this stuff out. They just assume with their modern lens that there's something malicious and nefarious going on here. So the Israelites are redeeming people. They are not buying people for slavery. And how do we know that? Well, I'm going to prove it here because it takes a little bit of research. So the word here in verse 45, strangers, toshab. So these are foreigners. There's different types of foreigners: nakar, toshabs, gers. There's like 4 or 5 different types. Secure. There's also secure. So you got secure, nakar, toshabs. Right here is toshab. And if you read down to verse, let's read this. This is really cool stuff. So the Israelites were actually redeeming people out of slavery so they could assimilate these people into their culture, which was a loving culture. They took care of people. In fact, it was asylum for escapee runaways, slaves from other nations surrounding Israel. They would give them asylum, protection. They would have sanctuary. Israel was a sanctuary state. I put this in my book. I give so many citations. I'm not making this stuff up for the sake of time. I could be here for hours just going through all the different scholarship on this. But if you go down, so here's verse 45. Let's start from 44 and read down. Both thy bondmen and bondmaids which thou shalt have shall be the heathen that are round about you. Of them you shall buy bondmen and bondmaids. It's better redeem, because just like Boaz, Ruth, just like Abraham. Moreover, the children of strangers that sojourn among you, of them you shall buy in their families that are with you. Notice it says families. These are family units. This isn't institutionalized slavery, which they beget in your land, and they shall be your possession, akuzah. They take this word property. It can be defined property. But you're going to see where I go with this. It's incredible. You can learn about the word property. But in verse 46, it says, you shall take them as an inheritance for your children. Who's them? Well, the toshabs, the children of the strangers, right here in verse 45. You shall take them as an inheritance for your children after you, to inherit them for a possession. They shall be your bondmen forever. Well, in the Hebrew, there is no really word for protect. In the conceptual sense, in the philosophical sense of forever, only God is truly infinite. So the word here, forever, does not mean forever in the philosophical sense. What does it really mean then? Well, if you understand, people understood what's going on here. Adoption I have in my book, as by the way. So forever olam meant to the Hebrews to the 50th year, the Jubilee. So the Jubilee and when the master died. So if the master died, that would be olam forever, or the Jubilee, the 50th year. So that's when they would be cut off. So if let's just say that someone went through the judicial process of getting their ear pierced as a token or commitment to their master, and they're contractually obligated olam, which means that to when the master died or the jubilee landed, they would be out of that contract. But they would probably do another one because they were so well taken care of. But over the brethren of the children of Israel, you should not rule over one with rigor. But here in verse 47, I'm going to prove right now and dispel any idea of slavery in verse 47. Remember, I said the word in verse 45. The word stranger here is toshav. Well, what do we see here in verse 47? And if a sojourner, this is a ger, the word is ger in the Hebrew, it's a type of foreigner, or toshab. So we're talking about the same people in verse 45 as in verse 47. Let's read what it says. And if a sojourner or stranger wax rich, does that sound like slavery, someone waxing rich?
Hey, brother,
Yeah.
praise I am. We are over time and our schedule is tight. Can you give people how to contact you and if you want to get the rest of your message on this and other topics? We're 8 o'clock. We're supposed to start our next one. They're waiting in the wings here.
Okay. Yeah, I will. Yeah. You just get a
Just-
hold of me at my email, Praise Jesus the Christ, or come on my YouTube channel, PraiseTheIAM. We have nightly shows, and we could continue this, and hopefully, people benefited from this. I hope it was educational, informative, and I appreciate for letting me be on here, Ken. God
All
bless
right.
you.
Well, thank you for all you've done for our ministry, Lord. For brother, keep it up for the Lord's ministry here. Thank you so much. So, yeah, the atheists love to pick on anything they can from the Bible about slavery and stuff like that. They don't realize they believe they came from a rock. They don't think that's stupid. I love picking on them. Thank you, brother. Come visit us sometime. Love to have you down here. All right, folks, we got our next program starting right away. If you need to get a drink or go potty, go fast and come on. And thank you so much, brother, for helping.